Dead America. Survivor Stories. Katie, by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Day 0 plus 72. North side of the Seattle safe zone. Katie walked down the darkened streets of Seattle, the entire sidewalk hers for the taking. In recent weeks, even during the biting cold evenings, people were out and about, enjoying a bit of normality after surviving the zombie apocalypse. However, after the incident with the militia, the downtown area was a ghost town once the sun vanished behind the horizon. Katie continued walking for a few blocks, looking around for any place that was still open. She paused on the next corner, spotting a lone light in a window, illuminating a sign reading Smitty's bar. "Well, I was hoping for coffee, but looks like fate has other ideas," Katie said. Katie made her way across the street, stepping in through the door and receiving a face full of heat as she crossed the threshold. Her eyes opened wide, startled by the sudden warmness. Across the small room behind the bar, an older man let out a hearty belly laugh. Smitty said, "Say what you will about these old buildings, but they knew how to heat the place up." "You ain't kidding," Katie replied. Katie looked around the small dive bar, spotting a couple of people tucked away in the corner nursing their drinks. The only other person inside was Smitty, the bartender. What he lacked in hair on his head, he more than made up for with the length of his beard. "If you don't mind sitting up at the bar, I'd appreciate it. I wasn't planning on being open that much longer, so I've already cleaned the tables," Smitty said. "If you're closing, I don't want to keep you. I spent enough time waiting tables to know that you don't want to be the customer keeping the staff there late," Katie responded. Smitty put his hand up, getting Katie to stop, before gently motioning for her to have a seat. "It's okay, I promise. There's nothing waiting for me back home other than a cold sandwich in season 3 of some god-awful dating reality show." Katie let out a chuckle as she made her way up to the bar. "Well, it can't be too bad if you're on season 3. It is terrible on a scale that I don't have the vocabulary to properly describe. The only thing it has going for it is its vapid banality," Smitty explained. "You and I have very different definitions of entertainment," Katie observed. "Believe me, there is zero entertainment value to it," Smitty insisted. Katie stared at Smitty in a confused manner, shaking her head before continuing. "If there's no entertainment value to it, and its best quality is its, what did you call it?" "Vapid banality," Smitty confirmed. "Yeah, that. If its best quality is vapid banality, then why do you watch?" "Because whenever I get depressed about the current state of the world, I can watch that show and be thankful that despite the hell on earth we find ourselves in, at least the part of our civilization that put that show out is gone forever," Smitty explained. Katie let out a chuckle as she turned her attention to the glass shelving behind Smitty. She stared it down for a few moments, letting out a sigh once she saw the prices affixed to each shelf. The lowest shelf of the cheapest stuff imaginable ran 3 rations. The higher the shelf, the better the booze and the higher the price. The top shelf, however, had a large sign beside it reading "Not for sale." Katie reached into her back pocket, pulling out a fistful of paper. She sifted through it for a moment, finding that she only had 2 rations on her. "Well, it looks like I'm going to have a glass of water. Unless that costs rations. Water's free. Would you like a splash of lemon or lime juice in it?" Smitty offered. "A little bit of lime if you don't mind," Katie replied. Smitty nodded and quickly made the drink, sliding it over to her with a practiced hand. The glass slid across the polished bar top, stopping right in front of her. "So, what's your name?" "I'm Katie." "And I take it you're Smitty?" She answered. "The one and only." Which used to be something stupid, I would say, but given how many people are left, it may actually be a true statement, Smitty responded. "Well, Smitty, can I ask you something?" Katie inquired. "Whatever you like," Smitty said. "What's up with the not for sale bottles on the top shelf there? Has nobody saved up enough rations to get a glass, or are you just showing off?" Katie asked. "Oh, those? I see you have quite the eye for liquor," Smitty replied. "You don't work in food service for as long as I did without acquiring a taste," Katie responded. "Ain't that the truth?" Smitty agreed. "So what's the story there?" Katie pressed. Before the end of it all, bottles like that were meant for special occasions, Smitty explained. Or the average night for a rock star, Katie suggested. Of which we're not, although I can rock out during some karaoke, Smitty added. Somehow I don't doubt that, Smitty, Katie said. At any rate, they were meant for special occasions, so I figured I would treat them as such. Especially after what I had to go through to procure them, Smitty continued. Given what we just survived, wouldn't that qualify as a special occasion? Katie questioned. Almost, but not quite. You are on the right track, though, Smitty replied. Katie took a moment, sipping on her drink, savoring the splash of lime before continuing. Well, don't keep me in suspense, Smitty. How does one get a drink from the forbidden top shelf? It's simple. I trade a drink for a story, as long as you let me record it, Smitty explained. Katie stared at Smitty in silence for a few moments, trying to get a read on him after the unusual offer. You want me to tell you a story, and you want to record it? I'll be honest with you, Smitty, a lot of strange things have happened in the last couple of months, but that might be the strangest. Smitty cracked a smile, nodding his head in agreement. Don't get me wrong, I know how it sounds, but I'm being straight with you. If you tell me a story, I'll make you a drink with the good stuff. What kind of story do you want to hear? Katie asked. I want to hear your survivor story. I'm pretty sure we all have one, that one moment where it looked like all hope was lost, but you somehow pulled through, Smitty responded. Katie began to open her mouth, but Smitty cut her off. And before you ask, I'm not looking for a story that brings up bad memories of someone you lost. I just want to hear a story about how you overcame the odds. Okay, if it means I get a drink, then I definitely have one of those stories for you. But I have to know, why do you want to record them? Katie inquired. Before the whole end of the world thing, I wasn't just a bartender. I was actually working on my master's in history. Granted, it was through one of those online colleges, so not the most prestigious degrees, but I was still doing the work, Smitty explained. So you're trying to get some extra credit? Katie asked. Smitty let out a chuckle before responding. No, actually I decided to embrace the moment I found myself in. Assuming civilization survives and rebuilds, somebody is going to have to write the story of what happened. And you want to be that person? Katie questioned. Why not me? I have the talent and the means to do it. And I find myself in a very unique situation that a lot of historians never get the opportunity to be in, Smitty replied. And that is? Katie pressed. I'm in the middle of the historical event, not just with other survivors, but with some of the decision makers who have gotten us this far. So my hope is that if I can record enough survivor stories, I can make a pitch to the military brass about gaining access to some of them as well. Who knows, there might be some filmmakers among the survivors and we can do a full-on documentary, Smitty explained. Katie took a sip of her drink, nearly shooting it out of her nose when a sudden laughter overcame her. So what's got you all tickled? Just the realization that it's the end of the world, and your goal in life is to become the bane of future school children's existence, Katie remarked. Smitty let out a hearty laugh, shaking his head at the notion. Well, that wasn't exactly what I had in mind, but it is what it is. So, what do you say, Katie? Do you have a story for me? Smitty reached underneath the counter, grabbing a small voice recorder and setting it on the bar in front of her. Katie stared at it for a few moments before nodding. Yeah, I got one for you. Excellent. So what's your drink of choice? Smitty asked. Katie focused her attention on the top shelf of the bar, scanning the options, considering them carefully before giving her answer. The party girl in me wants the tequila, but the adult in me wouldn't let me sleep if I didn't go for the 25-year-old scotch. Be careful there, Katie. I'm single, and that's most definitely the path to my heart, Smitty teased. Smitty let out a laugh, giving her a playful wink before reaching up and grabbing the bottle off the top shelf. He set it down beside the recorder, clicking it on and giving her a nod. Okay, the show is yours. Just say your name and dive into the story whenever you're ready. Okay, well, my name is Katie. She trailed off, pausing for a moment before looking over to Smitty. Do I have to give my last name? Because I'm pretty sure my social media profile is still out there somewhere, and it would keep me up at night knowing there was a chance some of those party girl photos would show up beside this story in a history book. Smitty let out a laugh, shaking his head as he reached for a glass. Your first name is just fine. Thank you. Okay, let's try that again from the top. My name is Katie, I'm 28 years old, and I am from Seattle. The story I'm about to tell you takes place about a week and a half after the outbreak. Chapter 2. Day 0 plus 11, 9:37 p.m. Katie pressed her back against the footboard of the bed, staring straight ahead into the darkness of the hallway. She couldn't remember how long the power had been out, only that it had been far longer than she would have liked. At the far end of the house, the sound of decaying hands smacking against the glass patio door continued unabated, occasionally joined by excited moans coming from the creatures trying to get inside. Katie groaned internally with every strike, knowing that it was her carelessness that had put her in this situation. The moment the outbreak had begun, Katie took great care to pull every curtain and blind closed, not wanting to risk the ghouls knowing that she was inside. Her strategy had worked great for the first week, with only the occasional straggler rummaging around outside as it moved through the neighborhood. That had changed 3 days ago when her curiosity had gotten the better of her. Before that moment, she had resisted the urge to look outside at the noises. However, when she heard a scream coming from her backyard, Katie pulled back a single blade of the long horizontal blind on the patio door. She hadn't even gotten a chance to see who had let out the scream, as a zombie in the backyard took notice of the blind moving, letting out a moan before rushing towards the patio door. Katie tried to conceal herself, but the damage had been done, and within seconds, the ghoul began banging on the glass. Within minutes, a crowd had been drawn, caught in a feedback loop of banging, moaning, and being captivated by the noise the others were making. In the days that followed, the only sound that managed to break through the continuous noise was the rumbling in Katie's stomach, and as if on cue, her gut let out a mighty, pained sound begging to be filled. She let out a sigh, rubbing her midsection, trying to soothe it. I know, but there's no food left in the house, Katie said. Her stomach let out one more protesting groan, as if it was talking back to her. Okay, yeah, you're right. Checking again couldn't hurt. Plus, I need to make sure that patio door is still holding up, she continued. Katie remained sitting on the floor, staring down the hallway for several moments before finally pulling herself off the ground. Before heading to the other side of the house, she grabbed a small flashlight off the ground, clicked it on, but kept it aimed towards the floor. She already had a mob of ghouls at her back door, and the last thing she needed was a stray beam of light to attract more to the front door. Katie shuffled quietly down the hallway, wincing at the banging as it grew louder and louder. She paused at the edge of the hallway, not wanting to emerge from cover. In her mind, she knew that the zombies outside couldn't see through the blinds, but it was difficult to convince herself. Come on, girl, they're already pissed off. Seeing you isn't going to change anything, Katie encouraged herself. Katie finally stepped out from the hallway, walking across the living room and into the kitchen. She stopped in front of the refrigerator, praying a silent prayer that something had magically appeared in there since the last time she had opened it. With a sigh, she pulled the door, shining the flashlight inside at a bare interior. Come on, brain, it's been nearly 3 days without sleep. The least you could do is hallucinate some food in there, she muttered. Katie slammed the door shut, frustrated at the lack of food inside. She flashed the light around the rest of the kitchen, every cabinet door wide open, revealing bare shelves. Not a morsel of food was to be found within. Katie dropped the light down to her side, defeated. However, she perked up at the first hint of an unrecognizable sound reverberating through the kitchen. She listened carefully to it for several moments, trying to figure out what the high-pitched rhythmic squeaking was. She traced the source of the sound over to the patio door, letting out a gasp as she shone the flashlight into the top corner. Well, shit, Katie exclaimed. Katie stared at the corner of the door, which was breaking free from the frame with every push of the creatures outside. She watched in horror as with every shove from the ghouls, the door moved further and further away from the frame. Get back to the bedroom. Get back to the bedroom, she repeated until she forced herself to move, racing down the hallway to the bedroom door. She slammed it shut, locking it up tight before grabbing a heavy bookcase and dragging it over. After securing the door, Katie rushed over to the small table in the corner of the room, sitting down and clicking on a battery-powered CB radio. The device was ancient, a relic that her father had held on to for decades and something that she couldn't bear to part with after he had passed. Luckily for her, there were others out there who embraced the older tech. She gripped the receiver tightly, clicked it on, and spoke as calmly as her panic state would allow. "Jimmy, are you there, buddy? Please, come in." A long pause followed before a gruff older man's voice came back through the speaker. "I read you loud and clear, Katie. Are you okay, girl? You're usually signed off for the night by now," Jimmy responded. "No, Jimmy, I'm not okay. I'm out of food." And Katie trailed off for a moment, struggling to come to terms with the threat that she faced. She finally snapped out of it, continuing. "Do you remember the crowd of those things I told you about?" "Yeah, are they still bothering you?" Jimmy asked. "They are, but it's about to get a lot worse," Katie replied. "They're not inside, are they?" Jimmy's voice hit a higher octave as concern filled his words. "Not yet, but it's only a matter of time. The patio door is breaking free from the frame," Katie answered. Jimmy didn't respond for a few moments, as if he was trying to figure out the right words. "Jimmy, are you there?" She called out. "Yeah, Katie, I'm here and I'm not going anywhere, but I'm afraid that you're going to have to move," Jimmy said. No, I can't." "Jimmy, it's dark outside and those things are everywhere," Katie exclaimed. "They are everywhere, Katie, and from the sounds of things, it won't be long before everywhere includes your house," Jimmy replied. Katie struggled to keep it together, a few stray tears rolling down her face before she sucked them up and wiped them away. "But where do I go?" she asked. "Do you know of a neighbor's house that might have food?" Jimmy inquired. "It would just be a shot in the dark, and it wouldn't do me much good since I would have to break in. I need someplace safe, not just food," Katie responded. "It's okay, let's just talk through it. I'm sorry, I live downtown and don't know your area all that well. What else is around there?" Jimmy suggested. "There's a couple of convenience stores within walking distance," Katie replied. "I used to work at one of those places, and they're built like fortresses, so if they're locked up, then you aren't getting inside." "Now what else is nearby?" Jimmy asked. Katie struggled for a moment to come up with an answer before inspiration struck her. "Oh, there's a supercenter half a mile away," she exclaimed. "In an ideal world, yeah, that would be the perfect place. Food, supplies, weapons, everything you'd need to ride this thing out. But how much do you want to bet that you aren't the only person who came up with that idea?" Jimmy responded. Katie let out a frustrated sigh, shaking her head, knowing that he was right. Her voice trembled with resignation as she spoke. "So my only option is my neighbors, isn't it?" she asked. "I'm afraid it is, Katie." "Now, do you have your go bag packed up like we talked about the other day?" Jimmy inquired. "Yeah, the only thing that isn't in there is the CB radio," Katie answered. "Good. Now this is what I want you to do. I need you to shut this thing down, pack it up tight, and think about what house you're heading to," Jimmy instructed. "I don't know, Jimmy, I really don't," Katie admitted. "Just picture your neighborhood, Katie. What's the nicest house on the block?" Jimmy prompted. "Probably that two-story one on the corner of the next block," she replied. "Good. Then that's the one I want you to go to," Jimmy affirmed. "What if I can't get inside?" Katie questioned. "Then you find a house with a fenced-in yard and get into the back. I've been watching the same ones out front of my building for the last week, and not one of them has figured out how to climb over the fence. So you should be safe, at least long enough to pick your next target," Jimmy advised. "Okay, I can do this. I can do this," Katie repeated to herself. "Yes, you can," Jimmy encouraged. Before she could respond, Katie jumped at the loud crashing sound coming from the kitchen. Within seconds, the moaning echoed off the hallway walls, sending a chill through her. "My God, they're inside," Katie exclaimed. "Then don't waste time talking to me. Pack up and move," Jimmy urged. "I'll be here when you get to the next house." "Be careful, Katie," he added. "I'm going to try, Jimmy. I'm going to try," Katie responded. Katie clicked off the CB radio, yanking it off the table before rushing over to the closet. She tossed the device into a small backpack filled with water, a couple of changes of clothes, and a few small quality-of-life items. Katie zipped up the bag and threw it over her shoulders before staring at a large butcher's knife laying on the ground. She leaned down, picked it up, and inspected it carefully, as if it was a foreign item she had never used before. "Remember, you have to hit them in the head." "At least that's what Jimmy said," Katie muttered. She pantomimed a stabbing motion a couple of times before being startled by zombie hands against the bedroom door. It didn't take long for the cheap wood to begin to crack under the weight of the ghouls on the other side. Katie moved quickly across the room to the only window, carefully pulling back the curtain to look out into the yard. The moon shone brightly, illuminating the yard, just enough for her to spot half a dozen ghouls shuffling about. Most of them didn't concern her, however. The nearest creature was only 5 yards away. "Just get outside, knock that one to the ground, and keep running. You got this, now move, girl." Katie repeated those words in her mind a few more times before being pressed into action by the continued sound of the door breaking apart behind her. She threw open the curtains, unlatched the window, and pushed it open as quickly as she could. The sudden noise drew the attention of the zombies in the backyard, including the one just a few yards away. Panic fueled her movement as she flung her leg over the threshold of the window, ducking down and throwing herself outside. Katie's movements weren't graceful. Her back heel caught on the windowsill. "Oh shit," Katie exclaimed. Katie struggled to remain upright but was unable to do so, falling backwards hard to the ground. The air forcefully escaped her lungs, leaving her struggling to catch her breath to scream as the nearby zombie let out an excited moan. Katie looked to her right, spotting the creature leaning over towards her, its mouth wide open, ready to take a bite out of her. Chapter 3. Despite her best efforts, Katie couldn't pull herself up to her feet before the zombie reached her. As the ghoul leaned over, she did the only thing she could, thrust the butcher's knife upwards as hard as she could. Her desperate attack found its target, the tip of the blade sliding cleanly through the bottom jaw of the ghoul. Blood poured from the wound as the knife pierced through the zombie's brain, ending its unlife. Despite landing a clean kill shot, Katie didn't have enough strength to hold the ghoul up or shove it aside, resulting in it collapsing on top of her. "Damn it," Katie exclaimed. Katie struggled to free herself from the crushing weight of the creature, sliding to her left a couple of inches at a time. The moans and footfalls of nearby creatures kept her motivated, summoning every ounce of strength to free herself from the dead weight on top of her. With a final grunt, she lifted the corpse just high enough to slide the rest of the way out, freeing herself. Katie scrambled to her feet, reaching down for her lone weapon that was lodged firmly in the skull of the dead zombie. Despite her best effort, she couldn't free it. Come on," Katie urged. She placed her foot on the creature's head, pulling with everything she could muster, but it was to no avail. Katie stumbled backwards as her hand slipped off the blood-soaked handle of the blade. Her first instinct was to reach for it again, however. The zombies in the yard were quickly closing the gap. "Forget it, just run," Katie shouted. Katie turned and sprinted away from the creatures, heading in the direction of the 2-story house on the next block. She managed to get halfway across the yard before being forced to stop dead in her tracks. "Jesus Christ, are they for real right now?" Katie muttered. Standing between Katie and the street stood a dozen creatures, all of whom were facing her direction and shambling towards her, undoubtedly drawn to the noise of her patio door crashing to the ground earlier. She looked to her left, hoping to see a path through her neighbor's yard, only to be left disappointed by the movement in the shadows. Katie briefly thought about going in the opposite direction, but a quick glance over her shoulder confirmed her worst fears. The handful of nearby creatures was bad enough, but more emerged from the shadows, with God only knows how many more hiding behind them. "Just get to the road, keep your head low and legs pumping, just like Jimmy told you to," Katie instructed herself. Katie followed her own instructions, getting into a crouched stance, trying to get comfortable with it before moving. Finally, with a guttural yell, she pushed off and picked up as much speed as she could muster. Katie moved swiftly across the yard, racing towards the left flank of the wall of zombies in the yard. The ghouls weren't as tightly packed on that side, however, There were still 4 of them within a few feet of each other. Katie let out a scream just before making contact with her shoulder, driving it into the chest of the lead creature, hoping to create a bowling pin situation amongst them. The gambit worked as she hit the zombie with enough force to drive it back into the others, sending them toppling over. However, one of the ghouls reached out and clipped her foot as she passed over them. Katie stumbled forward, face planting, her nose cracking after making contact with the ground. Stunned, she managed to scramble to her feet before the zombies could, stumbling into the street and putting some distance between her and the others who were shambling after her. Much to her relief, the street was mostly clear of zombies. However, she could see movement in the yards on both sides of the road. Only half a dozen zombies stood between her and the next intersection, and they were spread out enough that moving past them wasn't an issue. Katie reached her hand up to her nose, wincing in pain at the slightest of touches. She touched just beneath it, feeling the warmth of her blood flowing from it. It can wait, just find someplace safe to get inside. Katie continued urging herself to keep moving, even as the mob of zombies continued to grow behind her. It took her a solid minute of walking to get the 2-story house within view. She was relieved to see that there were only a couple of zombies in the yard. However, what really drew her attention was the fence at the side of the house. "Get your ass over that, girl. Move, now," Katie commanded herself. Katie took a deep breath through her mouth, not wanting to choke herself out by inhaling fresh blood, before picking up the pace. She adjusted her course so that she could easily move past the creatures in the yard and get to the wooden privacy fence at the side of the house. As she approached, the size of the fence came into fuller view, easily 6 feet tall and not the easiest to get over. However, a large central heating unit sat in the corner between the house and the fence, providing her just enough boost to clear it. Katie glanced over her shoulder, spotting the swarm of creatures getting closer to her. Without hesitation, she leapt up onto the unit, propelling herself over the fence and into the backyard. She landed hard, stumbling forward awkwardly. Instead of hitting the ground, however, she landed right in the arms of a zombie. Her instincts took over, shoving the creature away from her while backing up against the fence. It took her a moment to get her bearings, but only a fraction of a second past that to realize just how bad of a mistake she had made. "Oh my God," Katie whispered. Stretched out in the small fenced-in yard were a dozen zombies, most of them damaged badly by bites. She quickly scanned the fence, hoping that there was an open gate or down portion, only to find that it was sealed up tight. She glanced back to where she had climbed over, realizing that there was no chance of her being able to make it back over without a boost. The initial greeter zombie let out a moan as it staggered forward, alerting the others in the enclosed space to the presence of a fresh meal. Katie ducked underneath its arms, narrowly avoiding being grabbed and trapped in the corner. She darted away from the house and into an open area of the grass, trying to think of a way out of the mess she made for herself. Katie looked back to the house, seeing the glass patio door shut, but hoping that it was unlocked. With little other choice, she bolted towards it, charting a course through the 3 zombies standing between her and the house. Katie easily made it past the first 2 ghouls. However, the last zombie wasn't so easy. The creature stood over 6 feet tall, with no visible bite marks on it. The front of its shirt was stained red with blood. The ghoul reached out as Katie raced by, managing to grab onto her arm as she passed. If he had done that pre-apocalypse, there was a good chance her arm would have been ripped right out of its socket. As a zombie, however, he didn't have the agility to counteract the force of her movement. Katie pulled her arm away with enough force to send the creature stumbling towards the door, which was just a few feet away. Still trapped in his grasp, she did the only thing she could do, spin around and shove him towards the glass. Her ploy worked just well enough to avoid being crushed between him and the door. The combination of the zombie's weight and momentum, however, was enough to shatter the glass, sending both of them through into the kitchen. The zombie fell to the ground, pulling Katie along with him into the house. Rather than be pulled on top of the creature, however, Katie jumped forward, generating enough momentum to pull her arm free. Her freedom came at a price, slamming headfirst into the kitchen table. Staggered, Katie struggled to regain her composure after the blow, dropping to one knee in an attempt to prevent herself from falling over. The zombie moaning coming from outside, joining with the thrashing about of the giant creature a few feet from her, helped snap her back to the moment. Katie let out a pained grunt as she pulled herself to her feet, moving slowly through the kitchen as the zombies outside continued to close the gap. "I need to find some place I can defend," Katie stated. Katie paused for a moment, rubbing the side of her head, trying to get her mind working at full capacity again. Once that was successful, another salient point entered her mind. "I need something to defend myself with," Katie realized. Katie moved with purpose over to the kitchen counter, spotting a butcher's knife holder, grabbing the biggest knife, and pulling it out before walking away. She made it 2 steps before stopping herself, retreating and grabbing the entire block off the counter. "I've learned my lesson," Katie acknowledged. Katie looked back to the broken patio door, seeing the first of the outdoor creatures stepping through it. The lead creature nearly tripped over the large beast on the ground as it got back to its feet. Katie moved quickly through the house, looking for some place that she could defend, quickly setting her sights on the stairs. She studied them for a moment before walking up to the top and setting the knives on the ground. "Okay, girl, remember that gravity is your friend. These things are clumsy as hell, so use that," Katie instructed herself. Katie took a few deep breaths to steady herself as she moved halfway down the stairs. Once she was in position, she let out a whistle, hoping to get the attention of the creatures filing in through the kitchen. "All right, you assholes, I'm on the stairs. Come and get me," Katie shouted. Katie stood her ground, rocking back and forth nervously as she watched the giant creature that had opened the door for her come around the corner. It only took it a moment to lock eyes with her, letting out a moan as it shuffled to the stairs. The ghoul was uneasy as it stepped up, nearly toppling over on the first step. However, it managed to find its footing and begin its ascent. Katie bided her time, waiting on the lumbering creature to get within striking distance before making her move. It took the ghoul a few moments to move up the stairs, allowing for several other creatures to form a line behind it. Katie waited until she felt its fingertips on her shoes before kicking its hands aside and striking. She drove the knife down with as much power as she could. The tip pierced through the top of its skull. The creature's arms went limp just as she yanked the blade free, allowing the body to fall backwards. The hulking creature set off a chain reaction, sending half a dozen zombies falling backwards on the steps. Katie winced as she heard several bones snap from the impact. She looked down to the bottom of the stairs as a mass of bodies flailed about, struggling to get free from the entanglement. Her first instinct was to rush down and put an end to the ghouls. However, she thought better of it once more filed into the room. "Patience, girl. You have all the time in the world. They can't get in through the front, and there's only so many of them in the back. Let them come to you," Katie advised herself. Katie managed to convince herself, flicking a bit of blood off the blade before getting it ready to strike again. It took several moments for the next creature to set foot on the stairs to begin its ascent. "Step right up. I have plenty for every last one of you," Katie declared. Katie jabbed her knife forward, driving it through the eye socket of the creature. She held it in place, allowing the ghoul to free itself as it fell backwards, landing hard on the stairs and sliding back down to the pile below. "Okay, which one of you is next? I can do this all night." Chapter 4. Katie stood in the center of the stairs, her breath ragged and strained as she looked at the pile of corpses on the ground below. Every body was motionless, with a matching knife-sized head wound. She remained motionless for a solid minute, listening for other footsteps in the house, relieved to hear nothing. With a blood-soaked knife still gripped tightly in her hand, she made her way to the bottom floor, stepping carefully over the corpses and heading to the broken back patio door. Katie stayed out of sight, not wanting to risk being seen if something was still lurking. Much to her relief, the backyard was clear of any movement. "Okay, let's check out the pantry and hope that a household this big did the weekly grocery shopping before everything went to hell," Katie said. Katie walked over to the kitchen, her hand hovering over the doorknob to the pantry, fearful of opening it. "Come on, girl. What's the worst that could happen?" she encouraged herself. Her intention was to convince herself that the worst thing would be that the shelves were bare. However, it quickly dawned on her that a creature might be on the other side of that door. She tensed up, raising the knife to a striking position before turning the knob and pulling the door. As it flung open, Katie jumped back, just in case a threat was inside. However, she quickly lowered her guard when she heard and saw nothing. Katie pulled her flashlight out shining it into the pantry. A big smile crept across her face as the pantry illuminated, revealing fully stocked shelves of goods. She stepped through the door, inspecting them at a quick glance. 2 entire shelves were devoted to canned goods, mostly soups and canned meats. Another shelf was filled with pasta and other dry goods. "Oh, sweet baby Jesus, I love these people," Katie exclaimed. Katie reached over and grabbed a box of snack cakes, ripping the end off and grabbing a pack. She tossed the box back onto the shelf, along with half a dozen more, before opening her sweet treat and biting into it. Everything else in the world faded away as she savored the first food she'd had in nearly 2 days. Katie continued scanning the pantry, grabbing a bottle of water and cracking it open before retreating back into the kitchen. Katie removed her backpack, pulling out the CB radio and clicking it on. With a button press, she began speaking as she chewed. "Hey Jimmy, are you there?" she called. "Katie, thank God, I was worried," came Jimmy's response. "I hit the mother lode. A fully stocked pantry," Katie replied. "Based on how much chewing you're doing, I see little reason to doubt your claim," Jimmy responded. "I'm sorry, it's been a hot minute since I've been able to eat," Katie said. "So what's on the menu?" Jimmy asked. "Right now?" "A chocolate snack cake," Katie answered. Jimmy paused for a long moment before speaking. You know, a rational person might have gone for something of substance first. "Jimmy, I stabbed a dozen of those things in the head. I'm pretty fucking far from rational at the moment," Katie retorted. "Fair enough. But there is more than just snack cakes in the house, right?" Jimmy inquired. "Oh yeah, I have soup, pasta, canned meat. The works. If I ration properly, I should have enough to last me a few weeks, maybe even a month," Katie explained. "Sounds like someone had a big family," Jimmy observed. "Yeah, and I think I wiped them all out," Katie confirmed. "There were that many of them in the house?" Jimmy questioned. "No, it was the strangest thing. They were all locked in the backyard. This place has one of those big privacy fences, so there's no place else they could have come from," Katie replied. "And there wasn't anybody else in the house?" Jimmy asked. Katie's eyes went wide once she realized she hadn't fully cleared the house, only the first floor. "Jimmy, I'm going to need you to hold on for a minute," she said. "Katie, what's wrong?" Jimmy inquired. "Nothing's wrong other than I'm a moron," Katie admitted. "Katie," Jimmy began. "It's okay, Jimmy, I just didn't clear the top floor. It's not a big deal, because if something was up there then it would have come after me while I was fighting for my life on the stairs," Katie explained. "Just be careful," Jimmy advised. "I just fought my way through a horde of those things and found a massive stash of snack cakes. Trust me, I'm going to be careful," Katie assured him. Jimmy laughed for a moment without responding with words. Katie picked up the bloody knife before heading to the stairs. Before going to the second floor, she took a moment to drag a few of the bodies out of the way, clearing a path. "It would be embarrassing as hell to make it this far and die by tripping over a corpse," Katie muttered. Katie finally cleared a path and climbed up to the second floor. She moved carefully down the hallway to the right, stopping outside each of the closed doors, listening for any signs of life. After 30 seconds of quiet, she carefully opened each door, wanting confirmation that the place was empty. It took several minutes to clear the right side of the second floor, nothing alive or unalive moving about. As she walked to the left side of the house, however, she could hear faint sounds coming from the master bedroom at the end of the hallway. Rather than move there first, she took her time, checking the other 2 doors on the hallway. After a few minutes, the only door remaining was the one at the end. Katie stepped up to it, stopping just shy of the door and listening for several moments to get a read of what was happening inside. Much to her relief, there was only the sound of one creature inside, and it wasn't close to the door. Frustrated moans collaborated with a metallic clinking sound to create a horrific symphony. "Come on, girl. There's food downstairs waiting for you. Let's get it done," Katie urged. Katie turned the knob and gently pushed the door open, recoiling at the sight that greeted her. A lone zombie sat in bed, handcuffed to the bedpost. Her presence agitated the creature, causing it to thrash about chaotically. Just put it down, girl, Katie instructed. Katie let out a sigh as she walked carefully over to the ghoul, stopping out of arm's reach. She stared at it for several moments, seeing multiple bite marks on the arm that was trying to latch onto her. After several moments, Katie grabbed onto the free limb to hold the zombie at bay so that she could put it down. With a single stab, the ghoul was down for good. Katie let the arm go, allowing the zombie to fall limp onto the bed. She stared at it with pity for a few moments before turning to head back downstairs. Before she could get too far, she noticed a white envelope on the dresser with the words "Read Me" written in bright red ink. Katie grabbed it and walked back downstairs to the CB radio. "Okay, Jimmy, I'm back," she announced. "Is everything cool?" Jimmy asked. "Yeah, there was one more of those things upstairs, but it was handcuffed to a bed," Katie replied. There was a long pause before Jimmy came back over the line, a slight chuckle in his voice. "I was about to say something completely inappropriate, but I caught myself," he said. Katie thought about the situation for a moment, letting out a chuckle of her own as the inappropriate thoughts ran wild in her mind as well. "You're bad, Jimmy, but not as bad as what just flashed in my head," Katie responded. "I swear, one of these days, girl, you and I are going to knock back a few together, because I get the sense we'd get along swimmingly," Jimmy replied. "Same here, Jimmy, same here," Katie agreed. Katie ripped open the envelope while she spoke, catching Jimmy's attention. "What the hell was that?" Jimmy asked. "There was a note beside the bed," Katie explained. "Well, my television's been out for a few days now, so I'll take an old-time radio story," Jimmy responded. Katie shook her head, stifling a laugh while opening up the short one-page letter. "Okay, here we go. It says, if you're reading this, it means I didn't recover from my bite. After seeing what those bites did to my family, I'm fearful that I'm not long for this world. If you came in through the front door, whatever you do, don't open the back door. It was a struggle, but once Dad turned into whatever he turned into, the rest of the family struggled to get him outside. What happened next is a bit of a blur, but by the end of it, everyone was in the backyard and I was the only one still standing. The last thing I ever wanted to do in this world was hurt others, which is why I have handcuffed myself to the bed before I drift off to sleep. If I wake up in the morning, I can let myself out. If I don't, then, well, I hope you put me down so that I can't hurt anybody else." Katie paused as she struggled to read what was written after that, eventually shaking her head and putting the paper down. "There's some more there, but the handwriting is pretty bad and I can't make it out," she said. "It's okay. It tells enough of the story," Jimmy reassured her. "Yeah, I've kind of had my fill of depressing stuff today," Katie responded. "So let's have some happier topics, like what's for dinner tonight," Jimmy suggested. "Oh, that's an excellent question, Jimmy. I have to patch up a broken doorway before I can get to that. However, I know what's going to be for dessert," Katie answered. "Let me guess, another snack cake?" Jimmy guessed. "Definitely one of those, but I was thinking about having a glass of that scotch that's sitting on the counter over there," Katie replied. Scotch and snack cakes, together at last. "And all it took was the apocalypse," Jimmy remarked. Katie let out a laugh, struggling to get the words out. "For all we know, someone having scotch and snack cakes is what set this whole thing off," she said. Both she and Jimmy descended into laughter, a laughter that caught up to Katie as she sat in Smitty's bar. She stared down at the last little bit of scotch in her glass, downing it in a single gulp. "So there you go, Smitty, that is my big survival story. I hope that it was worth the price you had to pay to get it," Katie said. "Oh, it very much was, Katie. However, before we stop, can I ask you a couple of questions?" Smitty replied. "It's your dime, have at it," Katie responded. "What was your dinner that first night?" Smitty asked. "I went a little crazy since it was my first meal in a couple of days. I made myself a nice pasta with some of the canned meat and some crushed red peppers. They had a gas stove, so hot food was on the menu," Katie explained. "Canned meat pasta sounds like a gourmet dish these days," Smitty commented. "Just like it was that night, I can assure you," Katie assured him. "Okay, one more question, and I do apologize if it brings up a bad memory, and if it does, feel free not to answer," Smitty said. Don't worry, Jimmy is alive and well, Katie replied. That's good to know. I was nervous about asking that one, Smitty responded. Well, if you keep doing these interviews, you're going to have to get more bold, Katie said. I will take that under advisement. So is Jimmy still here in the city? Smitty asked. He is. We've gotten together a few times over the last few weeks. I wanted him to come out tonight, but he was still a little rattled from, well, Katie explained. It's to be expected. I tell you what though, since you were the first one for my project, if you bring him in here one night, I'll make sure you get a drink on the house, Smitty offered. A finder's fee? Be careful, because I can talk some people up, Katie warned. Please do, Smitty replied. Katie turned her glass up one more time, trying to get every last drop out of it before getting back to her feet. Well, Smitty, it has been a pleasure. I will see you again real soon, Katie said. I look forward to it, Katie, Smitty responded. Smitty nodded and smiled as Katie exited his bar. He glanced down at his watch, noting the late hour before looking to the last table with people still at it. Okay, guys, I'm going to need you to finish up. It's closing time. The end.